You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
This episode we're super excited about because we've been going through this journey like everybody else, right? And over the course of our life and our relationship, and we're continually changing and evolving. And the podcast has kind of been around with us for a long time as well. We're coming up on the 8th year, I think, or This is the 8th year. What's this year?
This is 23.
Okay. So yeah, this is the 7th year. Next year will be anyways, it's been around for a long time. And because of that, we tend to forget not just what we've recorded or the conversations that we've had, but we tend to forget that we think people know things about us because we talk about it so much on the podcast and because it's
the 7 years worth of content.
Yeah. But the truth of it is, especially if you're brand new to the podcast or if you just found us last week or something, then there's a lot about us that you don't know. Yeah. And so we wanted to talk today on the episode about our connection to the universe, right? Our belief surrounding energy and love and the universe and spirituality and all of these kind of different things, because truthfully, the podcast has its roots in that. Like a big chunk of why the podcast was started was to bring awareness to all of the different type of like energy healing modalities and the people that practiced those, and just more awareness to spiritual practices and beliefs and everything. That was kind of the origination of what the podcast was originally intended for. And then it's evolved and grown over the years with us. So that's been awesome. But we wanted to talk today about our journey with all of that stuff. And by that stuff, I mean the energy and the spirituality and the just all of it. There's so much of it, right? Baby, I felt like I was talking for 23 minutes.
Really? It was shorter than the whole time to clear the year at the beginning.
Okay.
No, you did good.
So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And where should we start? Do you think it would be beneficial to share our experience individually?
I don't know how deep we're supposed to get into that though right now. Yeah. Like, I think you should lead the way because you started this. You started the podcast.
No, you start. Tell me about your journey, babe, with energy.
Well, I don't know how, honestly. And I'm not like, there's different starting points. Then you realize the further you go. You're like, here is where it started. And then you go further and you start connecting dots further back. And you're like, oh, this is where it began. And then you go further and start connecting dots further back. And you're like, look at that. So I feel like we'll probably all kind of be like that, connect the dots back and be like, it's been on this journey my whole life. Just didn't know it my whole life.
When did you have awareness, or when did you start connecting the dots? Like, when did that start happening?
Like further back? Well, there was a moment where it turned from like when it was little points that you had awareness of throughout your life where you were like, oh, I can see how that could tie in. And it was just like a cool thing to validate kind of where you were in the moment. And then it took deeper meaning and different work, and you started seeing it different levels. So I don't know. And I don't know. I think it's just always kind of been there, but not actively, you know. Most of the time, most of it was resistantly, repressively. Like I pushed out energy and spirituality. So that's been I don't know when. It's been a while. You don't have
a moment or a time period where like suddenly you became...
Jesus, I feel like I'm failing the test here.
You're not failing any test. Like, when would you consider your spiritual awakening? When you started to reconnect to all of these things and to, you know, searching for the deeper meanings behind life and what was happening?
You know, I think I do mine just a little bit differently. So really sitting here with that question, when do I consider it? Because there's this is when I started and this is when I started. Mm-hmm. So this must be it. But actually I was on the journey for a while before I felt like I was allowed to be on it. And in a sense, so I think that's when it will start. I think that's when it'll start. There was so much that was around and dabbled in and curious about and experienced, but I had it drilled in my head that all of that stuff was evil and bad. And
Are you talking about like in childhood, wanting
there's stuff, but yeah, this is stuff to be scared of and resist of. And if you do this, then you're not following God. And if, this is the only way, and then all the suppression that comes from religion, just a whole bunch of different ways. So what I'm tying it to, and whether this resonates or not, this is what it feels like for me, isn't in when I started believing there was more and going towards it. It was the moment that I stopped thinking that, and I still struggle with times, but like that core belief of thinking that inside I'm evil and I'm bad, when that got lifted is when I'll consider like, oh, here's this moment of like where it really transformed for me.
Okay. Where maybe your connection to source and to energy was no longer through the lens of it was a bad thing or a dangerous thing or an evil thing.
I didn't think it was bad or dangerous or evil.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought I was.
Okay.
So it was the barrier there.
Okay.
Like I knew that it wasn't, but somehow I thought I was. Does that make sense?
Totally. So when was that?
I would like you to answer the question now.
Does it feel weird? Like I feel like
I'm just like it's almost like I'm not giving you the right answers, and so I'm like, well, that's my answer.
Sorry,
and I'm not really sure. What are you going towards? Are we going towards?
I was just having fun interviewing you.
Okay.
Like sometimes we get the majority of the time we have conversations that are just this, conversation between the two of us. But I thought it might be fun. And by the way, I didn't mention this to you before because I didn't think of it before. Just in the moment, I was like, oh, we could kind of interview each other about our spiritual journeys. So that's kind of what I was doing. But I didn't share any of that with you other than telepathically.
No, I'm not.
You don't want to do that?
No.
Okay.
Stop. God.
I really like interviewing.
Then we're going to have some other people on here and you can interview them all you want.
It's really nice not to have to talk about myself.
Yeah, I don't like being like, that just wasn't working.
Okay. What I was, I guess because I was I was thinking about the same question for myself, right? Like, when do I consider my spiritual awakening, or when do I feel like I started connecting those dots, right?
Yeah.
And because it's the same thing where I can look back and I can see all sorts of different experiences over the course of my life that I would now see through the lens of like spiritual experiences or some sort of energetic aspect of being connected to everything, right? To the universe and everything. But at the time, I don't remember thinking that that's what it was. Like what came to mind for me was I remember, and partially the reason I remember this is because I wrote this stuff down. I journaled a lot growing up. Like that was always the thing in school where you had to keep a journal for school. But I actually, I remember enjoying it. I remember having a good time writing. And so I would keep journals a lot. And one of the things that I started keeping track of was I had awareness that I was starting to see repeat numbers, or I would go rent a video game and it would come out to be $1.11, or walking to get something, I would, find 11 cents on the ground, and that would be the exact 11 cents that I would need to pay for the thing that I just, was going to get or whatever. So I had a lot of these synchronistic things that were taking place. And I remember when they were happening, because it was I journaled about them and I was keeping track and kind of documenting this thing happened and that thing happened. And I remembered at the time when those things were happening to me, I didn't have the lens of oh, this is some synchronistic numerology type thing. It just was cool.
Yeah.
I'm oh, that's cool. That's a neat thing. And it's almost like I saw something that, it's not something that I wasn't supposed to see, but I saw something different than normal. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing behind something and I'm oh, that's cool. look at how this lined up and connected. And then later on, right, I can now reframe it through the perception that I have today of like how synchronistically connected I've been my whole life, where I have been able to feel what was going to happen, or all of these kind of different things, right?
Yeah.
And then as far as like when I started to put those pieces together, it's right around the time frame when you and I got together. And it's around that time frame that we've talked a lot about, or at least I have on the podcast, where it's like started going to that group and learning about spirituality and opening up and meditating and, you know, all these kind of different things. So that's when it started to kind of, I think, what I would consider to be like my spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
But that term is really strange too, I think, right? Because
it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, right? I've been awake my whole life. It's just that I forgot at some point. And because of the programming and because of the stories and because of the beliefs and everything else, right? But the truth of it is, it's like it's always been there. I just started to see it again. That's kind of what it feels like to me too, right? It feels like magic. It's like in those movies where, you know, well, I can't think of an example of one, but I can imagine a lot in my head right now. But that's what it feels like as I start to see the magic of life again and of the universe and kind of this experience.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like for me today.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
I like, a big part of mine was like having somebody else put words or pictures to things that were happening behind this, like things that were my normal that I didn't recognize as anything other than like a medical condition. Thinking I was crazy, thinking like that's just what things look like, or like my eyes, like that's the biggest one that like always pulls me back, is me just thinking my eyes were being weird. And I would say that like my eyes are being weird
because you would see auras, right?
And I would see, but I didn't know because it didn't like. It's like people paint a picture of this is how something looks,
Mm-hmm.
and when you're doing this is exactly what it would look like. And if you didn't do it that way, then you weren't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was because it's not always auras, it's energy. I see energy, I see the different patterns. Sometimes it's auras, but it's the energy. It's like the field around. And I was like, if you see auras,
it has to look like this.
It looks like this. I've seen the paintings. They describe it. Is it this color? Is it this what you're always seeing?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would get these like big glows around people, and I'm like, what's my eyes doing? You know, my eyes are being funny is what I would say, because I thought it was something.
Yeah, like blurry vision.
Yeah, I was like, this is like my eyes are being funny.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened, and sometimes I just get lost in watching. And I remember the first time I got color, and it just like was like, what the, oh, is this what this, you know what I mean? And then I saw paintings, and it's like the same direction where we are now, which is kind of funny, where I saw paintings with the golden glow around people and around, and that's just where I hit. And I was like, that's a thing. That's what my eyes do. That's the thing that I thought was my eyes being funny.
Was that when we went to the Krishna temple?
Mm-hmm. That's when I saw it on portraits. That was more than just like, what's happening? I keep rubbing my eyes because it was such a natural thing. I would immediately start rubbing my eyes,
Mm-hmm.
thinking there was something wrong with my eyes.
Do you remember doing that your whole life?
Whole life.
That's awesome.
Whole life. Eyes being weird. Eyes
Yeah.
are being weird.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which means that at some point, I think I told somebody, and they're like, "That's weird," or something. You know what?
Yeah.
So my eyes are being weird.
Yeah, or they probably said, "Oh, that's just blurry."
Or I don't know.
Like you've got something in your eye, or your eyes are watery. Because it's interesting, because that sensation when your eyes are kind of blurry is almost like when you wake up and you're kind of still asleep and you're rubbing your eyes and you're kind of getting the sleep out of your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost the same wavelength that you see energy on sometimes.
Right?
Where it's really easy to convince yourself that it is just your eyes playing tricks or your vision isn't totally focused. And if you do try to focus in oftentimes, like if you're looking at energy or auras, if you try to really hone in and focus on it, you can't see it.
Just, yeah.
You have to set your eyes not off to the side. It's not always like look over to the left or something, but you have to allow your eyes to relax and your vision to almost kind of unfocus.
Expand. Yeah.
And so it would make sense that you either thought that or somebody told you like, oh, that's just
weird, right?
Yeah.
That's just weird. But it was like the people aren't blurry. Like they're clear. It's what's happening around. So it's, and I don't have any memory or a wound of, I have plenty of like things being like, that's weird, that's evil. But like around that one, it just makes sense that I don't think as a little kid, I would think, oh, this thing that I'm seeing is something wrong with me, my eyes being weird. I think as a kid, I would be like,
yeah, it would just be matter of fact.
This is this thing.
Yeah.
But that's just speculation. I don't know. It's like somewhere along the way, somebody must have given me the idea that was just my eyes being weird. But I don't know. It was cool to kind of unfold though, and the first time I saw color, it just like shocked the shit out of me. And then I was honed in. I have no idea what the person was saying, but it was green and that's my arm on the table. I'm not farting.
We're just ripping ass over here.
It was just green and it was so big and it was like following him like this big, like a bubble. Like, when you had those big bubbles and you would move and it would like kind of elongate. And it was like that. And it was just like, I'm like, this is something different. And that's not like, oh, I saw something, so now I'm awake. That's just like a part of the journey that was like a cool thing of, it wasn't that a re-remembering. It was sometimes, right? But so many of the things were like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's what that is. And it's cool because I get to recognize that in other people too. I've worked with some amazing women who like really embody that and they have all these things, but they don't have words for, and they haven't had like direction with it. I'm like, this is all going to be very familiar for you one day. And it's just it's cool. You have so much to learn, and then so much you're learning is like an explanation as opposed to new information.
That's so interesting that you would say that in that way. Like, this is all going to be very familiar to you one day. That's where I feel like we're at with this space of, because what I don't know if I'm always nervous that, like, I do this over and over and over on the podcast where I try to explain what's happening. Like I'm nervous that people aren't really understanding what we're talking about. And so I realize too that it's that other thing where I'm over explaining myself and trying to justify, the reasons for why I'm saying the things that I'm saying, because I don't really believe that I have worth or value. And it's all of those other kind of things as well. However, what we're talking about is all of this spiritual stuff of being connected to some source of energy that exists not out in the space of time in the universe, but within everything. It is everything. It is all of it. And feeling connected and tapped into it and being able to see it and feel it and connect with it and all these other kind of things. So I remember being just like flabbergasted by, like, you would learn something new, or you would have some new awareness of like, oh my God, like I can travel to the Akashic records and like tap into my spirit guides, and I can have a past life regression experience, and I can like, it was just this beautiful unfolding of, you mean that's the reason why I love rocks? Like, I have the ability to, like, we can cleanse our water in the moon, like all of these things.
Yes, there's been a lot of
that just keep unfolding.
That's cool.
It's the beautiful, like,
I remember, like, you can do water in the new moon too, and all the moons do something.
Right. The more we continue to open up to not just allow ourselves to learn about, but to connect to and to recognize and to feel, and like alternate dimensions and different, all of it used to feel really not just overwhelming, not like it wasn't the same overwhelm of like trauma and depression and life. It was just so much information being bombarded by it, right? Like you start recognizing everything. But now I feel much more at peace with it. Now it's not to say it's like quote unquote normal, but that's how it feels to me. Like, I shouldn't say it's not normal, because I was thinking about it from the term of like, what is normal? And I mean, it's normal to me now. It's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, I believe it all now.
Yeah.
And not only did I not used to, but just the journey of believing into all of it now, it just feels really normal. And it is fun to see people going through like that process of waking up.
Yeah.
Where they're like, you'll never believe it. We can sage and we can use this. And did you know that lapis does this when I put it on my third eye? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, that's a neat experience. So it's fun, but
It's very cool.
Can you speak some more to, because I think, and this also has to do with like how I view myself, right? I don't see myself the same way that you see me or the way that the world sees me. But I think you have way more connection to that space, way more connection to energy, way more connection to all the different ways that our human body can connect to it than I do. So I'm fascinated by all the things that you're able to like connect to and experience and feel and draw from. And I feel like I've got like two things, right? But, and I know that's not the case. I understand that it's, like I said, I don't see myself through the lens of truth all the time. You know, it's often through the lens of all my beliefs about myself and everything else. But so I kind of want to talk a lot about what you're able to do.
Cool. First, I'm like, I want to talk about why it is that you think you have like two. And I have an idea and I want to say it to you and see if it resonates.
Go ahead and say it to me. Let's see if it resonates.
I think you recognize only like two, when obviously I can see, or can see so much, like this extensive amount of abilities and connection that you have. Is because I think it's because it's just natural to you. You've always done it, so you don't really, first, it's like you haven't seen the picture, you haven't seen the contrast to recognize it's something different.
Oh, interesting.
And so you're like, yeah, there's like this. I'm like, have you had a conversation with you? So I think it's just like something hasn't shown it in a way, or you haven't looked at it in a way where you see the contrast. It's just like, that's
I
like,
would say the same about you. I feel like you're like when I'm always framing it in a way of like, do you realize that this is what just happened? Because I feel like, again, I'm so like, these people listening are like, what are these people talking about?
What is this that just happened?
Right? We're not being specific about things. Do you feel comfortable being specific about things? I feel like there's some resistance in you right now.
I don't.
That's okay.
There's definitely, of course, there's resistance. I'm, be specific.
Okay.
And I don't know that, I'll be as specific as I can be. Sometimes it's too hard to be specific.
That's
Sometimes
true.
you can't say that word more than twice in a row.
Sometimes when you're trying to explain energy, words don't work.
They don't work.
Yeah.
Sound effects. I default to sound effects. I'm like, right? And you're like, yeah. Pew, pew, pew. That's what I do.
You specifically have the ability to like consciously, like, for example, when we work with somebody, oftentimes you will energetically connect to that person on the day that we're going to be meeting with that person, right? On the day of the call or something like that. And sometimes it's not even people that we have met yet. Sometimes it's somebody that's scheduled like a free discovery call and they're coming, so they're basically energetically connected to us at that point, and you'll start picking up on that. And that always like fascinates me. And I think it's really amazing that you have the ability to do it. And I don't think you know that you're doing it. Like, that's the whole thing, is like 9 times out of 10, I'm like, hey, did you think that maybe what you're feeling isn't yours? And you're like, oh my God, I bet it's totally like you are suddenly reminded of your empathic ability to connect to other people's energy that you haven't even met, right?
I think this feels awkward. I don't want to go back and forth. We have to talk about our own stuff. It's too hard to be like, hey, look at you. I'm like,
I'm excited for you to give me an example of something I'm doing that I'm not framing that way or seeing that way. But don't do that right now.
Why? Let's just do that. Was there a question?
Yeah. Like, what does that feel like when that happens? And do you understand that, maybe understand isn't the right word, but do you see it through the lens of you're connected to energy? Like, you are a antenna of, like, do you know what I mean? And that you have the capacity to do that subconsciously.
I don't necessarily think that I'm doing that. I think that they are. I think that when they're coming into this space, they're like, their energy is coming here. And so they're sending it. And I don't always know that it's like.
But you're picking it up.
I am picking it up. And I'm recognizing that. But I'm not like, it's not a thing of like, here, I'm going to sit here and go on a journey and find this person and tap into them right now and find out what they're feeling. You're not
Professor X with
before the call.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like they come into the space. They're sending their energy. It's what they're like focusing on and thinking on.
And do you see how beautiful it is that you're able to just pick that up?
Sometimes.
Right. Sometimes.
I don't always pick it up. And sometimes they don't
always send it.
It's overwhelming. Maybe that's, yeah. So yeah, that's a cool thing. I guess, I don't know. I feel really awkward right now.
Okay. What's something that I do?
It's like you're having 2 conversations with somebody, and that sounds like, let me give a minute to flesh this out. It's like you're in a conversation with them, and they're talking, whether it's on the phone or through Zoom or in person, one-on-one. But you're having a conversation with them and you're listening to them. And then there's this other part of you that is having a conversation, like your higher selves are having a conversation, your energetic selves, because they'll say something that's not even here. And then somehow you come through and you ask them a question. And it's like the question that is like, here we are. This is the core. This is where we're at. That wasn't, I'm like, how did you get that from that? This question that comes out. It's like there's whole other conversations that are going on where you, like, I think I called you a soul whisperer once because you connect with that, and that's where their healing is. That's where their pain is. And that's where they start to make transformations, like a light gets shown on these areas that they didn't even know to grab. But then you ask the question and it's like, oh, that's the unlocking. That's the code to unlock that chamber that they needed to get into. See, and it's so cool. It's so cool.
Like, I think you're right.
I know I am.
But earlier you said you're doing stuff that you don't realize you're doing because you've just always done it. Like, I feel like I've always done that. And it's interesting because it's not always within the context of like trying to help somebody or something like that. I can just do that. Like in conversation, like somebody will be talking to me. Cause as you started to describe it, I'm like, okay, I understand what you're saying. And I'm like, what is that though? Like, what would be the energetic, do you know what I mean? Like, what is that?
Soul conversations, higher self conversations. You're like, is that
I guess I'm looking for a label that I could. Do you know
we
what I
did
mean?
a podcast about the need, labels.
The need for labels.
Yeah.
So I'll try to.
I'll send a link to you.
I heard about this podcast that they did a whole episode on.
I gave you a label. I called it soul whispering.
Yeah, that.
Is mine not good enough?
I like that.
Is it too big?
It's so funny how much of that sounds too like woo woo, airy and fairy.
Yeah.
And it's so funny how
you are woo woo, airy and
fairy. I know,
right?
Like, it's so interesting how I'm like, no, we can't call it soul whisperer. That sounds too out there. And then at the exact same moment, I'm like, sorry, I'm trying to stay on topic here. I want to flesh this out.
It's funny how uncomfortable we both are.
Right.
We don't talk about
what I
this
was
enough.
explaining, or what I was thinking as you were describing this, because when this happens and when I'm in a conversation with somebody, it's like I am having two conversations, but it's interesting because it's like I'm watching a movie. So I'm talking to somebody and I'm hearing them and everything, but then I have this other thing that's happening where I'm picturing them throughout space and time. I'm seeing different things that they've gone through and different glimpses of like.
Are you like touring their Akashic records?
And so it's like, as people are talking, suddenly they will say something. I'll hear something here with words, and suddenly I'll get a scene of like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's where that comes from. And it's like, I haven't really realized that
that's a really good
what I was doing,
Yeah.
right, or what was happening, but I can see it so clearly now over the course of my whole life, like having conversations with people and talking. And like I said, like, it's just regular conversations. It's not like in the scope of like, come here, I'm going to help you, right? And I can see it too with police work. I could see how I would be interviewing people and talking to people, and sometimes like interrogating people, right? And the same things would happen where I would be like, wait a minute, you just said something that not only feels like a lie to me, but also I feel like I can catch a glimpse of what the lie is connected to or what the space is connected to. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a cool energetic thing.
That's a really cool. I think that's why you navigated towards theta, because theta was the closest resemblance to that.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously what you do, it's more than, and there's so many different things. But yeah, that's really big. That's really big, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I never thought of it other than just like, boy, I don't know. I never thought of it through the lens of it being some sort of like energy
Soul
modality or
conversation.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely is. There's soul conversations that happen. There's like way to have conversations with higher selves. There's theta. There's all these energetic connections. There's where the screenplay. There's so many different things, and you pull like all of those right there into one waking conversation where you're fully present with somebody and all that's happening, and you're able to like. That's a big deal.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's a big deal.
What else? What else should we talk about? We do so many things. Like, that's the whole thing. We wanted to have this conversation because
I know, and I'm nervous as shit, and I'm like, we did it.
I know, right? It's so funny that you're uncomfortable. I'm not. I'm super comfortable talking about all of this stuff. But we realized that, like, if you were to look at our social media, like if you're,
You have no idea.
like, a lot of times at this point where we're at with our business and our career and everything like that, this isn't really present in our social media presence, right? You're not seeing our deeper belief and practices when it comes to spirituality and energy healing and the universe and
elements.
like what we're talking about, the truth of what we're talking about. Like, first and foremost, like, look at this table with our obsidian and our
Move our
quartz
plastic
and
bottles because we're,
you know, and it's not just like, oh, we have rocks, so we're spiritual, but we have a connection to so many different
I can
things.
tell you stories about each of them.
And so we're all of that. We're the full spectrum of beliefs when it comes to like spirituality and energy healing. And I mean, I guess I shouldn't speak for we, even though I'm almost 100% certain, but like, I believe in all of it.
Yeah.
I believe in every different, like, nobody can bring something to me at this point and I'm like, boy, I don't know if that's real. I'm like, nope, that's definitely real. That's real in whatever dimension it is that you just pulled that information from or connected to that part of you.
Yeah.
Like, how have you, maybe this will be fun, how have your beliefs about energy changed and evolved over the years?
That's so funny. It's like it's changed extensively and
Right.
expansively, but like, how could I express it? Oh, one thing that changed is, and I had, it's such a thing. I had such a, like a silly moment, where it was like the universe has always been such a big deal. Okay. Universe. And I'm like, and then I made the connection where we're one, but we're multiple, and the multiple is one, and all at one in this expansive and cyclical nature of all things and more things and more things. But I was like, uni is one. and there's like all these multiple dimensions and things. I'm like multiverse in my mind on the pod. I'm like, there's multiverse. And it's like, that's like such a thing. But at that time, like that unfolded for me in my brain. And it was like, it's silly, but it's cool. It's really cool. That's just like one of the little things of where it's such a known thing, but it wasn't such a known thing. And for me to like have that expansion happen, and then like, well, everything is like in something. So what's the container? So you have all the multiverses and the whole thing, and what is that in? And then you have the whole space, and what is holding space, and it just like it just keeps going. And seeing this like in external, internal, just this entire loop that keeps, yeah, that was just cool. I got really excited, and it was just like, oh my gosh, it just keeps changing. It just keeps changing. Seeing like energy on things and the plants, and like really starting to like notice I don't even know how to say it. It just, things just started becoming like everything's alive. You know, everything is alive, and it's just cool. It just keeps going and going and going, and I'm sure it'll just keep going and going. I'm not sure, like, oh, I guess maybe. No, it's going to keep going and going and going.
Right. What's the belief system going to be 20 years from now? How is that going to shift and evolve and change? And
yeah.
I think about, like, for me, a lot of the things that have changed and evolved, like I could sum up with just my ability to hold duality, like the ability to just acknowledge two truths that are complete opposites can exist at the same time.
Yes.
And being able to really sit in the space of that allowed me to just start believing everything rather than seeing everything through just my belief system. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways that stands out to me is like past lives and reincarnation. And I remember very much like going through this. It's like the spiritual wake up process comes with all these different levels of things, right? It's suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, this is why I like the color blue. Oh my gosh, I have a chakra. Oh my gosh, this is my chakra stone. Oh my gosh, like it comes with all of these levels of awareness and awakening. And one of them is like past lives, right? And you're going to go through your past life learning phase where you're connecting to your past lives, and you're having past life regressions and memories and dreams and meditations, and all these beautiful things are going to start coming through with all of these past lives that you've lived in this correlation and connection. And I did that. Like I went through that journey and that experience of like beautiful connections to past life experiences and correlations between the way that I am today and memories from those moments. And like, I've had really beautiful experiences with all of those things. And then like a next level of that process for me, right? That's not to speak to anybody else's journey, but was the separation of those being past, where those weren't experiences that had happened. That wasn't a past life memory or, not regeneration, regression, right? That was a present moment connection to that space that was happening like exactly at the same moment. And now it is like my belief around all of those things now, right, are they're currently expanding to the next evolutionary point, because it used to be like, oh, that's all of my energies spread out throughout space and time. And when I will connect to what I would used to see as a past life, it's a present moment connection to that version of me living in that space and time, and we're connecting for whatever reason it might be. I didn't need to understand why we were connecting. I just saw it through the lens of like, okay, for some reason they needed some of my energy in that moment, and I needed some of their energy in this moment, and it's really just us, meaning myself, sharing energy back and forth between myself. And then what I'm currently under is realizing that it's all versions of me, because the me that I'm referring to is the one, right? It's the universe. It's the singular energy that exists and is everything. All versions of me are having simultaneous experiences all at once, and they are energetically connected, always helping each other and sharing information and supporting and loving, because it is all the one self having that experience. And so I'm not having past life memories. I'm having present connections with all versions of me. So when I go to the grocery store, I'm talking to myself. When I pass myself in traffic, when I'm talking to you right now, right? These are all just versions of me that I'm having experiences with. And that part is starting to kind of like take hold in my brain, because it seems really big. Like it seems almost too much when I start to really peel it back, because then I'm like, that means all of your past lives are really my past lives. And it's not like from this perspective of like, I'm the only thing that's important in life, right? It's from the awareness of, oh, we're all the same thing, just having different experiences in different bodies. And those bodies have what they would call past life regressions, but that's not really like, it just becomes this overwhelming soup of immensity that's hard to grasp through the lens of this tiny little monkey brain. And I believe it all.
Yeah.
So it might be too big for me to fully embody at this point, but I'm open to it. Whereas before, I used to be like, no, that's a past life. See, this is the way that it works. Those are past life memories that you're connected, right? And that's how I used to see it, but it's evolved. And I can say that almost across the board with all these beliefs and all of these thoughts, that it's all just continually evolved, which is cool, right?
It's way cool.
That's what the evolution process is all about. That's
way
why we're
cool,
here.
Right? Remember you talked about time too. That was a big one for me, is realizing like the linear cyclical nature of it.
Right.
That was like,
And the duality of linear time is 100% real and 100% important and 100% at play.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like influenced by linear time, and it's non-existent.
Right. They're both true.
Right. Where time is non-existent and it's all happening right now. And that seems so counter.
Yeah.
Like, well, those two things can't exist at the same time. It's got to be one or the other. One of those is right. Which one are you going to prescribe to?
That's that thing. Only one is right.
Right. And there's almost like you could sum that up with people that are like atheists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they just don't have a belief in a higher power. Like they're the people that are going to prescribe to linear time is truth, that it is all linear, because we're born and then we die and then that's it.
Yeah.
That's all. There's nothing outside of that.
Yeah.
And then there's these other people that are like, time doesn't feel real to me. Right. Cool. So for you, that's that experience.
Right. It's so many different ways that you look at it from the perspective. I love that, because it's like, if you take, you're like 1 + 1 always equals 2.
Right.
Right.
But then there's another universe.
Well, there's even this universe.
Yes.
Right. You take one person of one gender, another person of another, you have 1 + 1. And when they come together, they make 3. You know, and that's just like a really silly way to look at it. Just like bringing that 1 + 1 does not always equal 2.
Right.
Even in this world. And sometimes 1 + 1 can equal 8. Like there's so many different ways that can happen. There's a perspective where this is true for this situation and this can be true for this, and both can be right. And there's different perspectives, different situations, and different all over. But just like when you know and you're willing to like, maybe.
This one trips me out.
Yeah.
Because everybody's God is the right God, right? Everybody's
Yes.
God is the true God. And I'm over here being like, oh no, that's okay. Like that's just the God that you believe in now. Like that's just your religion now.
Yeah.
That's just what your belief system is now. But that might change for you and it might not. And either way, that's totally fine. But your God that you believe in, that you think is the one true God and the one true church and all those different things, that's totally okay. That's just your perception of the existence of multiple gods. And all those gods are true. And all those gods are real. And all of those beliefs are legitimate to the people that believe them.
Right.
And then I'm like, so I believe in all gods being the true gods for the people that believe in them, right? I'm totally okay with being like, yeah, that's the universe that you're living in and that you've created in your mind. And then, but I have this belief that there is a singular, that energy is the thing that is all things. And then I'm like, what if, like, I have to even stretch outside of, does this make sense? Where it's like, my belief is like, I believe in the universe being the container for all things. And it is a singular thing, and all beliefs and all thoughts and all gods stem from the same thing. So your God and my God and their God is all the same God because it's coming from this one source. And because I believe in duality, I then have to question that one source, even for my own belief. Because again, it's just my belief where I'm at right now, where I have to be able to question, like, what if there's more than just the one singular? And I'm like, no, you don't understand. The one singular is everything. So even if there is more than the one singular, it's still the one singular. Does that make sense? Or am I just like,
no, you're doing good.
Way out in left field?
Like, it's just so it's that expansiveness that everybody, that like nobody is wrong, right?
Exactly.
But the problems come when, like, it's like all this where people will like go to war to prove that they are right, to prove like there's
right, the crosses that people will die on.
And it's like, yeah, it's just so hard. It's just when we start to get into that, and I'm not really sure how deep I want to go into that one right now, because we were going on one track, and like we'll totally spin over here. Maybe we should. I don't know.
Yeah. Like the whole thing of not every, like, it's right for you.
Well, it's
truth for you, right? And so people will go to war to defend their truths or their way of life. And the reality is that we're all just the same thing.
Right.
We're battling ourselves.
I have there was a lot of distance for a long time. Like, I had believed in the universe and like so much, but there was a lot of distance because I couldn't separate from a hateful, spiteful God. And
where God was punishing.
Yeah. And they make it like God is loving, God loves all. However, like, as long as you're this,
right.
this.
I mean, God is casting people down to hell. That doesn't sound like love to me.
Right. There's all this, and not even that, but like people believing that they get to enact violence in the name of God. That if you're this, like, it, like, there's passages in these churches and like even on like their website of, I mean,
religious wars are the things that, you know, it's that are still happening today.
I know, but it's so that I understand that. It's just like that kept me away from that for a long time because it was like, there's enough hate, you know. Why am I going? Okay. This is more of a conversation than I was prepared to go into. So it's really hard. I'm stammering. This isn't the direction that I was going, which is,
it's okay.
It took me a huge time of separation and allowance of self for me to cultivate the relationship that is now, which is a loving God, which is creator, that is just loving. It's everything. And oh my gosh, I wish I could remember who said this. Because there's this, like, the belief that I have is, like, we're just calling it the same thing, whatever you believe in, right? We're just calling it we're calling it different names. We're calling it different names, and we're viewing it through different perceptions of, you know, you believe that X, Y, and Z is this, and all of these must be punished. That's like your belief. You believe that you're entitled to this. You believe that only you are loved. You believe that everybody is loved as long as you believe that everybody is love, that we are all the same. You believe that they're like everything isn't. It's like wherever you are, it's all the same is how I perceived it, right? But that's my belief. And I know in my heart that it is love, that it is like all loving. And even that can be challenged, right? Somebody said, and I'm really sorry that I can't quote who this person is, but it was like God loves you so much creator loves you, universe loves you, whatever you believe in or you don't believe in, like it's fine. You know, just if this applies to you, of course, it's going to show up in a way that you would recognize and the way that you would relate to and show up how you need it to show up for you to be seen. So it's like how you, was it Elizabeth Gilbert? Was it Glennon Doyle? Who was it? It might have been Elizabeth. I don't freaking know.
Sounds like Liz.
Right? But it was like going out like with your kids and they want you to be this for them. They want you to, if you're like, you go along with your kids. You different ways of like where you're strong, you're carrying stuff, you're going to play silly, you're going to show up how they need. And so it's like, why would it be any different? And that just clicked in me. Like, and it gave like so much freedom for people. I'm like, that's like, who am I to say you're bad for how you need God to show up in your
Right.
life? Who am I to say that you're bad for how, and I don't like what you're doing to other people. I don't think you need to hurt other people. Like, maybe you could just like let God sort that out if you're so God and not actually hurt other people, but that's how it comes out. But who am I to say that your vision of what God is wrong, because that's the God that you needed to feel love.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. I don't know if I've ever heard that before or kind of thought about it through that lens, because I feel like I have a much different, it's so funny too, because I think it is kind of the difference between masculine and feminine. Like I tend to see things more straightforward. And so for me, like when we talk about like good and evil or wrong and right or war and peace, like all the things that are happening right now in the world that are so terrible and tragic, and like the level of suffering that's on the planet right now is so immense, right? And I'm like, it is, if you are seeing it from a linear standpoint of these bodies and this existence is all that there is, then yes, it is very sad and the suffering is immense. But if you see it through the lens of we are not these bodies and everything that is playing out is love, and is not just divinely guided, but every single human being on the planet is exactly where they're supposed to be on the path that they're supposed to be on, because it is just all love and it's all unconditional love, then, oh, it's not that bad. Then it's not that big of a deal. So I see it from the perspective of that way, the latter one that I just described. And I can see how that's keeping me detached from it as well. Yeah. Where trying to actually connect to that amount of suffering and pain is really hard. Yeah. Is really overwhelming. Right. And so I will kind of spiritually bypass the emotion aspect of it by staying up here in the clouds, where it's like, well, it doesn't really matter because these meat suits we're walking around in are just, not that big of a deal. They're replaceable. They're not the end of us. We continue past these, right? So it's interesting, the duality there again, right? Yeah. That's the big part, like accepting two truths can be right. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing with relationships. We talk about that all the time too, right? Where when we started to be able to be like, oh, turns out we're both right about this situation, right? Even though it really feels like I'm 100% right and you're 100% wrong. Right. And being able to just be like, oh, nope, we're both right. Yeah. Then we can just move on rather than continue contention and fighting. So that would be beautiful if the world could just be like, oh, we're both right. Right. Now we don't have to fight anymore. Now we don't have to fight. We can find a way to coexist. Like we can just live on our little pretend islands of nationalities and cultures and just exist the way that we want to exist because we're both right, however we see it. And that's okay. Drawing them. There's so much. So much. There's so much. Is there anything else that comes up for you? I mean, obviously we could talk forever, right? Something did just come up, but it left my brain as soon as you said that. So I was like getting ready to say this and then it's gone. Yeah. I think that we still have like our belief in energy. Energy is love. Mm-hmm. Comes from this thing that we're talking about. It's the belief that the energy that we are referring to this entire episode is love, that's all that it is. It is just the unconditional love of source and creator in the universe. and it's in all things and connected to all things. So that's why it's energy is love.
Right.
And we still believe that. That hasn't changed. It's only evolved and grown and expanded even more so. And then like spiritual practices like yoga came into our life last year, and that has been a really significant thing, I think, for both of us, right? Being able to have yoga is such a great practice. Like yoga itself is a connection to this divine source that we're talking about. And so it's like it's how you can use your meat suit to connect, like not just with asanas, but all the different practices and the breathing and the, you know what I mean? The mindset of what yoga is just this, it's a way of living in connection with source, in union with source. And that's been a really big deal for us in the last year or so. So we could go on and on about what that looks like and has looked like for us. And then there's also just all the day in and day out things that, it's not to say we take them for granted, but they are just our norm, where we will have like continual, like dreams are such a big deal for us because we're interpreting our dreams, or we'll have, we're always connected to what is happening below the surface of everything, and not just with like shadow work going to the depths, but it's like we're always connected to this energy in the way that we move through life and the way that we live our life. And so what else? Anything else you want to add?
Not to that part. I love when you're like, hey, anything else?
Well, we're moving up, right? We're going to go on to the Q&A
No,
at the
there's
end,
lots
but
of stuff that's
wanna...
sparking through my head, but right now it's just like bouncy and chaotic, which is how it happens a lot. You get this and it goes here, 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 and it would just sound like a whole bunch of messy to try and start like, well, here's this thought, here's this thought, here's this thought. So it's a conversation for another time.
Before we wrap, we're not fucking...
I'm about to start beatboxing.
I want to share another one of the things that I see you do naturally. That's an energetic connection thing that you've always done and you take for granted. And again, it's not taking for granted in a negative way. It's just you don't see it through this lens. And then if you're cool, you can share another one about me.
No, I don't want to be put on the spot.
Okay, that's cool. Let's move on then. At the end of every episode, we answer questions like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode in the little intro, and you can call in those questions. The number is 423-521-0355, or you can email them to us or send us a DM on social or whatever it is, right? We always love getting those questions, however we get them. This week, this is the question. I struggle really hard when it comes to commitment. I avoid telling friends yes when it comes to things, even if it's stuff that I want to do. I'm also constantly afraid in my marriage. I don't know how to get over it. Please help. So it sounds like a massive fear of commitment and kind of how it's manifesting in their life. Do you want to speak to it first?
Yeah. I almost am wondering if there's a sense of feeling like they are a letdown or going to let down. So saying, it's just like follow this out here. So saying yes because you don't know if you'll be able to show up, or how you'll be received, or what the expectations are. Now, this is just kind of like jumping out there because it totally was like, this feels avoidant, but it really feels like a fear of failure in a sense of not saying yes to things that I want to say yes to. I'm not being able to connect with my friends, not being able to go out. And in the relationship that you're in, you're always afraid. You have a lot of fear coming up in there. So I would get curious about like, oh my gosh. I don't know why I'm tapping into this in a different way. And maybe I'm just like making connections here. Where did you learn that you weren't enough to show up as you were? Where did you learn that what you had to bring wasn't enough and it wasn't going to be enough, and that your presence is going to maybe cause lack or not be received or maybe be dangerous for you, and where you're in a situation but you can't provide enough? It's leaving you in a fear-based state.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective either, of like, I have a fear of commitment because if I commit to something, I'm really afraid that I'm going to mess it up.
I'm going to fail.
That I'm not actually going to be able to do it. And then suffering through the shame of failing in this moment, or like even the simplest thing of like going to, dinner with friends and then showing up and just fucking it all up and your friends suddenly not liking you anymore, right? Because you said the wrong things or, whatever it is, right? You messed up and spilled your drink on yourself or something and now you're humiliated or whatever. That fear of not being able to meet the expectations of life and letting people down because you realize, or not realize, but because you feel like that's what you always do. That makes a lot of sense.
And then if you end up doing this thing that's hard for you to say yes to as well, you'll be letting your partner down, you're letting others down. So no matter what, it circles back to where you feel like you're letting people down. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, right? Or fear of commitment and being in a relationship because you're afraid that you're just going to fuck it all up. Yeah. Well, as far as what to do with that, reflect on what we've just shared, I think is a really good place to start, because those stories, like Steph said, like who told you that? Where did you learn that programming? Where did you hear that before? Where did you see that modeled? And what's the truth behind it all? Is that really the case? Or is it okay if we mess up?
Yeah.
Right? If somebody makes a mistake, are they still worthy of love? Are they still worthy of commitment and being in a relationship? So some stuff to ponder and think about. Thank you for the question. And as always, you can call those in. The number is 423-521-0355. And it's in the show notes down below too. So you can just copy and paste it and call us. Yeah.
And I want to say, if like you ask us a question and we get into it on air and you want to go into a little deeper, message us and let us know and we'll have a little conversation.
We love interaction. We love hearing from the people that listen to the podcast and what all of these episodes kind of spark in you. And if you're a fan of it and you enjoyed this episode, or you have enjoyed some of our episodes in the past, it would be awesome if you left us a review and rated it and all those kind of things on whatever platform you're listening to it on, because it helps the podcast grow and expand and all the good stuff. So thank you, everybody, and hopefully you have a beautiful, wonderful day. We'll see you next week.